Now is the time, by Hafez. Now is the time to know that all you do is sacred. Now, why not consider a lasting truce with yourself and God? Now is the time to understand that all your ideas of right and wrong were just a child's training wheels to be laid aside when you finally live with veracity and love. Hafez is a divine envoy whom the Beloved has written a holy message upon. My dear, please tell me, why do you still throw sticks at your heart and God? What is it in the sweet voice inside that incites you to fear? Now is the time for the world to know that every thought and action is sacred. This is the time for you to compute the impossibility that there is anything but grace. Now is the season to know that everything you do is sacred. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Friends, we are so excited to be with you this week and every week. We have a really exciting guest today that Phil and I have been talking about and pondering over and reading through her book for the last couple of months. We were introduced to today's guest through Kelly Hughes, who we have formed a fun relationship with. And who has introduced us to a lot of our great guests over the last year or so. And we've got some more coming up here soon. So thank you and shout out to Kelly. But today we are here with Dr. Liza Rankow, who is an interfaith minister, educator, activist, and author. Her life work centers the deep healing that is essential to personal and social transformation. Liza is the founder of One Life Institute, and she has written a gorgeous, gorgeous book called Soul Medicine for a Fractured World, Healing, Justice, and the Path of Wholeness. Liza, would you like to add anything to that intro today?
No, that's fine. Thank you so much, Jenny. And it's a pleasure to be here with you both.
Thank you. Thank you. Liza, we usually don't talk about the books that we read beforehand. We like to leave it all for when we have these conversations, but we couldn't help it. We've been talking about your book for forever, and it's one of those things that I've had to read really slowly and that I've had to read a couple of different times, and something that just keeps bubbling up for me. And so I'm grateful for your work. One of the things that I wanted to start off talking about is you talk about wilderness times a lot in your book, about finding ourselves in the wilderness. You say on page 8, the wilderness times are painful and difficult, and most of us want to get out of them as quickly as we can. Yet to shortchange the process is to pry open a cocoon prematurely because we want the butterfly. And all we're going to find in there is goo, or a half-formed bug body with tiny, useless wings. The question is not, what do we need in order to get out of the wilderness, but rather, what do we need to inhabit the wilderness? For as long as it takes to complete our transition, our metamorphosis, you see, the wilderness is a season, not a location. And like the healing of wounds or the becoming of a butterfly, the wilderness journey is a process, not an event. Why do we fight the wilderness time so much? And how can we learn to cocoon a little bit better?
I love this question. I think we fight them because they're so uncomfortable. Who would want to hang out in such profound discomfort and affliction? Really, it's absolutely natural to be like, where is the exit on this? But what wilderness times, and what I mean by that metaphor is, times of struggle and difficulty, times of formation and transformation, both in our personal lives individually, but also in our collective life. As a human body, as a soul of humanity, and in many ways as the entirety of our planet right now. Times of wilderness demand that we go deep, right? Because in order to remain in the wilderness, as I said in that chapter, and be engaged and present in that transformative process, we have to be rooted in something deep enough to sustain us, right? So, you know, platitudes, shallow theology is not going to get us there. It invites us to tarry with that which is deepest in ourselves, maybe to discover that which is deepest in ourselves. And then, you know, we were talking before we started recording, and I'm sure this will come up again in our conversation, about Dr. Howard Thurman and Thurman's wisdom. And Thurman said, when you go down deep enough inside yourself, you come up inside of everything and everyone else. That at that deepest place, you know, there is oneness with all of life. And I think the wilderness invites us into that.
So I'm going to second. This book has just been such a gift. And I know I joked about it before I started recording too, but if you're a friend or a family listening to this, just be ready because you're probably going to get this book for some holiday coming up because, and really it's just my own selfishness because it's really speaking to a lot of where I find myself right now of both being a pastor, but also somebody engaged in some social activism work. And so, again, that the Thurman stuff has resonated deeply, but the way you just pull so many things together and, you know, some things just find you in a season sometimes in life. And this has been one of those things that has found me in a season. And one of the words that you put in here that I'd never heard before, but felt like it was hitting me in this season was that Nepantla. Did I say it right?
Nepantla.
Nepantla. Yeah. Will you talk a little? I think it ties in with this wilderness concept, but I just think it's a really great word and would love for our listeners to get a concept of what that word means.
Yeah, well, it is part of the Nahuatl culture, and was brought probably most prominently to awareness in the US and in our discourse through the wonderful writer, poet, activist Gloria Anzaldúa. And so she talks about Nepantla as the in-between space, as kind of like the wilderness, as those times, those liminal, transformational times and spaces in our lives, again, individually and collectively, where we're not what we were, but we're not yet what we're going to be. And that there are times that invite us, just as we've been talking about, into deep introspection and reflection, but they are supremely uncomfortable and painful. And really, you know, all that we've said about wilderness, I think, is affirmed by Anzaldúa in regards to these times of the in-between, right, of Nepantla.
I love you quote Valerie Kaur in here. What if this is not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb? And then you say the answer, of course, is it's both. Mm-hmm. Breakdowns and breakthroughs are happening at the same time. Endings and beginnings are simultaneous and overlapping. They require one another. That is such a good reminder for where we are right now, just as a country, globally, because it certainly feels like we're exclusively in the tomb, I think sometimes. Talk to us about that both and of tomb and womb.
Mm-hmm. 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 You know, this has been such an important awareness for me in navigating these times. You know, to be honest, I wrote the book because I was seeking. It's the book I was needing. And so all the people I consulted, through research and all of the, messages from nature and ancestors and everybody else, I thought, well, if I need this, surely others do as well. And of course, as a counselor and just as a human in relationships in the world, I knew I wasn't alone. But yeah, it does feel like it's the tomb. But if you look around, Jenny, right, there is so much beauty emerging. The news just shows us pretty much the headlines about what's dying, about what is the atrocity report of the day. And I think it's important we know about that, right? But not in the headlines, in communities and in pockets and in all over the country and all over the world. People are creating, remembering ancestral practices, birthing, right, new ways to be in relationship with each other, or old ways to be in relationship with each other and with the earth. It's not that, I cringe when people say, oh, we just need to get back to normal or back to what it was before Trump or back, it's like, no, no, no. That was not, from its inception, the United States has not been something we want to replicate, based in genocide and enslavement, patriarchy, capitalism, colonialism. I mean, let me run the list, right? We don't want to go back to the heyday of that, right? We want to go forward into a world that honors the dignity, the belonging, the sacredness of all life, of our human siblings, our non-human siblings, of our Earth Mama and ancestors. I mean, there's a big everybody here that the dominant culture has forgotten about. But there's a lot of folks who have not forgotten. And what's being incubated, what's being envisioned and created is profoundly hopeful.
To mention just briefly with Thurman, and just again, like the idea of social activism, when I was introduced to Thurman, I felt like it was kind of a coming home sense of, oh, here's just somebody who was working on this, writing about this, and living this in so many beautiful ways. And when I say this, it was that blending and beautiful integration of both this kind of mystic as well as a social activist or social justice or whatever you want to call those. Like, but it seemed like previously, for me at least, those weren't always one and the same. Either you were kind of in this camp or you were in that camp. If you were a mystic, then you were going to like seclude yourself from the world. Like, I know that's like a, caricature version, but like, or you were going to be like the social activist, and the faith part of it was minimized almost. But Thurman just so beautifully intertwined those aspects. And what I love about your book so much is that you invite me into a whole other host of people that are doing that.
Right.
Will you give us just, I don't want definitions because I think this is all beyond definition, but will you give us some stories or some examples of people who are, I say people, experiences, who are embodying what that means to be somebody who is of the mystical nature and also engaging in social activism? And again, I don't want to say definitions because I think this is beyond just definitions of things, but for people who are like trying to suddenly try to integrate these two things and figure out how they align, will you talk to us through that alignment?
Yeah, I'm going to sneak up on what you're asking,
Perfect.
Phil, by starting a little bit behind
Great.
it. What I was just describing in terms of the dominant culture in the United States is something that emerges out of a worldview of separation, of othering and dualism, right? The mystic worldview is of oneness, is of our belonging to this infinite sacred wholeness that breathes through everything. So if that is somebody's ethos, if that is the paradigm, the worldview, how could oppression even be possible? How could extraction from the earth, decimation of the earth body be possible? Who are you going to bomb? Who are you going to genocide if we are all one? And so when I talk about, and Thurman, Thurman is my papa in this, the shoulders, among the shoulders that I stand on in this. He wrote, gosh, as early as, I want to say 1939, I think was the Eden lectures that he did on mysticism and social action. That when you are coming from that worldview of oneness, there's an ethical demand within that we work to make the outer world responsive to that inner truth. And so I talk in the book, the term that I used, that I came up with during my doctoral work, back in the late 90s, and then later found that another Thurman scholar, Alton Pollard, who you may have bumped into in some kind of way, that he used the same term in his doctoral work prior to mine. But it's descriptive of what I was just elaborating. But I don't mean by that the people I'm calling quote unquote mystic activists necessarily self-identify as mystics. From the book, I find the trying to sort out who is a mystic and what is, that's not helpful. It's not helpful. I lean more towards talking about the mystic worldview, which is available to anybody, regardless of what your own transcendent encounters may or may not have been. Yeah. So I was so inspired by seeking out folks from different cultures, different spiritual and life ways, different historical moments, different movements for transformation, who in some way embodied this integration of a spiritual worldview of oneness with a commitment to justice, transformation, in whatever their particular area might be. Yeah.
Can I just read back to you real fast on page 67?
Go ahead. I love when people read me back to myself, because it's such a gift to know that it spoke to you.
Well, our season has been on reciprocity, right? Like that's kind of been our driving force for the season. A lot of that has been through nature, which we'll get to, right? Like we'll get there. But on page 67 in the soul care chapter, you say, by bringing spirituality into our activism and embracing activism as a spiritual practice, we are transformed as we transform our world. The process is reciprocal.
Yeah.
And so there's no question there. It's just like, it's putting a icing on the cake of what you just explained, and just so beautifully like tying it into what our theme was. But there is this reciprocal nature to this whole aspect.
Yeah. And I forgot that the way you framed your question was about the schism.
Sure.
I said I'd get back to it, and then
Totally.
I got all wrapped up in my whole mysticism and social
Absolutely.
change.
Yeah.
But yes, we live in a culture that divides things.
Dualism,
and that fracture line between spirituality and activism has been hard and deep. Folks on each side, even folks who believe in the essential nature of both, will say, well, we need to do this one first. Either we need to, come to our own personal enlightenment before we start trying to change the world, or that will magically change the world. And then the folks who say, no, we have to address injustice before we have the luxury of doing that inner exploration. And the point that I make in the book, which you lifted up in that quote, is that they're not separate, that they're synergistic, and they're like the in-breath and the out-breath. We need both, and one without the other is not complete.
Oh man. I love how you talk about the gift that comes with our pain. And I've heard that phrased in kind of unhealthy channels in evangelical churches, but the way that you talk about it is not that. It's what is the invitation in this moment. It's learning from what's happening to you. It's all of these gorgeous things. And I love that you talk about kintsugi in your book, and you say restoration of wholeness is not a return to the pre-damaged state that would be impossible, but the vessel is enhanced by honoring what it has been through. It's the same with us. What would it mean to honor our broken places with the tenderness and reverence of the kintsugi artist, to attend to each fracture and lovingly apply the golden balm of healing, to make visible, even celebrate, the map of our journey, allowing others allowing others to study it as an inspiration for their own. I oftentimes want to teach out of the shiny, beautiful parts of my life, because that's appealing and that's pretty and I like it. But the things that matter most to people are the things that I think I'm honest about in my suffering and in my struggling, and the things that I am vulnerable about. What is it about vulnerability and honesty and about our broken parts that invite other people into healing?
There's a universality to suffering, that the particulars in our individual lives may differ, although there's a fair bit of commonality there as well, to be honest. But the experience of suffering itself is part of life on this planet. And I have a hard time with theologies that try to equate suffering with somehow being out of God's favor. I think that's spiritual malpractice, right? So if that were the case, then, the billionaires would be God's chosen. And I really know that that's, I'm pretty sure that's not the God of my understanding. But even they suffer in I'm sure many ways. Well, that's another conversation for another day, perhaps, or Phil, perhaps something to delete out. Maybe that little tangent doesn't need to be in the final mix.
Nope, it's all part of it. That's an important piece. Just kidding. We can take it out. No.
Yeah, let's answer Jenny's question more precisely here. There's a way that we feel isolated in our suffering, but in fact, it is a common ground. And when we take the risk of being authentic about our own areas of suffering and struggle, it allows us to be relatable. Your shiny parts. I love how you put that. Your shiny parts are not something that people can connect with in the same way and be affirmed by, right? Whether they put you on a pedestal or not, there's a distancing with that, even if you're being admired. But when we connect in the reality of our humanness, I think that's where the healing happens. And also if we're denying, our places of suffering and of struggle, we're short circuiting our own journey of deepening and the gifts and the learnings that are available through our struggles. They're not fun teachers at all. They're not the kind of teachers you would want to go out and sign up for, but they are inherent in our human experience.
Did you have a follow-up, Jenny? If you wanted to follow up, go ahead.
Yeah. I love that you quote Viktor Frankl when he says, despair is suffering without meaning. And it just made me think that there are a lot of folks stuck in the depths of despair right now. How do you define, what do you define as suffering without meaning? What do you define? How do you define that?
Hmm. I'm not sure I have an easy answer for that one, but we're the ones that assign meaning to the events in our lives, right? Two people can experience the same events, or no, can have the same events unfold in their lives, but our subjective experience of those events is based on the meaning that we assign to them, right? If we come, I also flash on because I know, Phil, you're a pastor. You you might have meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. That whole business, right? That sometimes pain and suffering just befalls us, a diagnosis, an accident, a loss. Sometimes it's perpetrated upon us with ill intent, and that's often the hardest ones to find any purpose and meaning in. Yeah. And sometimes the meaning that the contextual meaning that we give it might just be, this should not happen to anybody ever again. Child abuse, for example, right? How can we take whatever it is and in some way, I call it spiritual aikido, kind of take that energy and redirect it? So I think I use the example in the book of someone who has lost a loved one to gun violence. Now, there's not like meaning in that act of murder, but we can give it meaning by how we respond. So some families may work with other families who have experienced that trauma and tragedy and provide support. Some may work for gun control laws. Some may work to look at, well, why did, if it was a young person shooting another young person, what was going on in their lives? What's the structural injustice that even makes a young person pick up a gun and shoot somebody? So lots of different ways, but to somehow turn that horrific experience into something that has value, right? That's a way to infuse meaning. I don't mean a cheap meaning like, well, everything happens according to God's will, right? But how we respond, how we give it meaning by our response to it. That's what I meant.
I'm going to get this a little wrong, I think, but it made me think of the chapter on initiation and the idea of trauma, and how I think it's, maybe you're referencing Gabriel Mate, if I remember right, but where it says that like there's the event that happens, but the trauma is actually how you respond to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what I found so fascinating in that conversation that you have here, that what you wrote down was you partnered it so well with the sense of initiation from Somé, and the idea of I think there were three phases that Somé talked about, of the
Mm-hmm.
departure, the trial and uncertainty, and then the return. And that like trauma can be the same, like a semblance of initiation, but what we fail so often is the return piece of that. And what I
Mm-hmm.
love about it is that it calls us to attention that this is never just it's back to the oneness. It's never an individual experience, but there's always a communal aspect to this. So
Mm-hmm.
one, I think what I'm getting to is this sense of ritual, right? Like we've lost a
Mm.
sense of ritual to make meaning. Will you share a bit about initiation and ritual and how that can help us in this sense of meaning making?
Yeah. Well, you did a nice broad strokes, recap, but the chapter is looking at initiation as an archetype, right? And in traditional cultures, and again, as a white-bodied person talking about traditional cultures, I'm very careful to let folks from that culture speak in their own voice, and and only sharing things that they have shared publicly with the intention that it be disseminated. So Malidoma Somé um, has written about, spoken about both portions of his own traditional initiation, but then he's made the bridge to what he calls erratic initiations in the modern world, in the dominant culture. That because we don't have any longer, we did at one time, but we no longer have the full richness and cultural understanding of initiation in the US dominant culture. But life is still going to throw initiatory experiences at us, because the purpose of initiation is to develop a spiritual maturity within us, to help us get clearer about our deeper purpose and how we can offer that in service to the collective, to the community. So his point was, without some awareness about the return, the integration stage, then we have traumas happening all the time, but we end up in these incomplete initiatory experiences. We're stuck in the ordeal part without meaning and without the support to derive the healing, the insight, the growth, the purpose. And so it made me wonder, can we apply intentionally, right? Evoke the archetype, the lens of initiation as a way to address both our personal individual traumas and the collective societal trauma. Um, and I think it offers resources. And when I started poking around looking for that, a friend of mine told me about the Ritual for Return program that I describe in the book, that uses exactly that principle to work with folks emerging from incarceration, to help them integrate the trauma, both the trauma pre incarceration and the trauma of incarceration, to discover their true selves, their purpose, their dignity, and to be welcomed home from the ordeal of incarceration, to be welcomed by their loved ones back into community through a ritual process over 12 to 14 weeks, and then completing with a threshold rite of passage. So it's beautiful to see. Here's what it can look like. Here's a for instance of what it might look like.
Can I ask a follow up on that real fast? We'll talk about imagination, I think, in a minute too. But can I invite you, if you had a magic wand and could wave your wand and institute any sort of initiation process, recognizing the culture that we live in for young people? Like I think about when, people of faith, like United Methodist Church, where I'm a pastor, like we have confirmation, but in a lot of spaces it's been, it used to be a year-long process, and sometimes now it's 8 weeks, or it's a half a year, or it's 4 weeks, or it's maybe one time. Like it's been so almost neutered. And you have catechesis, you have a variety of things that in faith communities we have, but as a society, if you could wave a wand and institute a initiation process for people, because I feel like so much now it's college. People are like, oh, well, college is, there's a time and place for everything. You go to college to grow up, and it's like,
Yeah, but do we?
right? Like it. I think college is the
I don't think
antithesis.
beer parties and frats are necessarily going to bring our deeper spiritual maturity.
But I think societally that's how it's viewed, right? And I think you're exactly right. So if you could do it, what would you flex your imagination to create?
Phil, I have to kind of push back on the premise a little bit,
Pushback. I
because
love it.
even in the US, all of us have lineages that go back to somewhere. We are not like this de novo population of white people that have no traditional ancestral lineage. We've just been severed from it to some degree. And then there are folks from so many parts of the world who are here in the US, right? So, yes, the dominant culture is a white supremacist culture, but the human beings who are inhabiting what is now called the United States come from all kinds of places and cultures and ancestral lineages and rich traditions. So, on the one hand, folks can study what the initiatory practices in their lineage may have been. And then we also may want to come together, not with one prescription from me for here's what everybody can do.
That's a lot of
But
pressure. Yeah.
well, it's also inappropriate.
It's inappropriate. That's right. Yeah. Like too much of a melting pot
I
here
could make something up, but
Yeah.
it would be inappropriate. What's more important is for groups to come together and determine for themselves what would be meaningful. There can be an organic, co-creative rite of passage invented that would have meaning for whoever the group was that was planning to experience it or offer it to their young people. There's a subtle difference. I mean, we do still have remnants of rites of passage in the dominant culture, graduations, weddings, all of that. It's a transition from one part of our lives to another part of our lives. But what Elder Malidoma identifies is that it's missing the rigor. It's missing. We don't want to sign up for. We'll sign up for a rite of passage where we learn about our culture and we practice some of the traditional ritual elements and maybe the foods, maybe learn some language, but we don't go through the ordeal, and that is part of the formation, which is why I think it's very I don't know, it resonates with me, since our world is full of ordeals right now. So yes, communal rites of passage and ritual and all of that, rich, absolutely, yes, we need all of it. And how can we use those ritual elements, those cultural elements, those collective elements to help us navigate the ordeals that are inherent in our life anyway? To provide a container, right? See, that's a good word to evoke, right? In traditional cultures, there is a container to hold the ordeal. There is the community that is holding the folks going through the ordeal. There is a tradition. There are elders that are holding the initiates, right? When we're talking about the US culture and all of these traumatic, erratic initiations, as Elder Malidoma talked about, there's no container.
Yeah.
And so perhaps the ritual elements that you're asking me to prescribe, the collective practice of how do we hold people going through trauma, and how do we help them integrate the potential learnings and growth from those traumatic experiences as a way to resolve it and complete it.
Yeah, I hear you saying that's deeply contextual, or it has the potential to be, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but is there a way to weave them together? You know what I'm saying? So it's not like we're over here having traumatic experiences and then completely separate from that, we're creating beautiful communal rites of passage. How can they, and I haven't thought about this before, so thank you actually for inviting me to think about this. I may have a different answer tomorrow, but what's occurring to me now is how can those be woven together in a way that helps us to heal and integrate the traumas that are so widespread? How can we look at what is the container that we create? It makes me think about the work of, you may know the name Francis Weller, who, after I wrote this chapter, I actually found out that Francis is speaking about what he calls rough initiations, using a very similar way to look at it as I described in my book. He's best known for his work with grief, and he has created modern day grief rituals where folks come with whatever grief they're carrying and bring it into community to share those griefs, to process those griefs, and to ritually hold a container for them to be released, for them to be expressed, and for them to be resolved. So maybe something, in that manner might be worth exploring. You're making me think. I like it. I like when I get an interview that makes me think about something I haven't thought about before. So
Well, I appreciate you pushing back. That needed pushing back on. So I think, yeah, I appreciate that.
I just love all of what you're saying, Liza. But so often you talk about the both and the weaving of the things together. It's not us over here and y'all over there. It's not we're here and there's nature. It's all the things together. And you talk about the events of the world provide us with constant opportunity to have our hearts broken open in response to atrocity, yes, but also in awe of the beauty. The invitation and the challenge is to stay present to all of it, to allow our hearts to be as wide as the cosmos. If we look around and all we see is suffering and evil and pain, we're not paying attention. But if all we see is sweetness and happiness, we're not paying attention. It's through the spiritual discipline of remaining awake to it all, of inhabiting the both and rather than the either or, that our hearts are the most expansive and alive. Yes, I think we all know that having our hearts broken open is hard. Like, that's tricky business. That's hard. I think giving in all the way to awe can be hard too, because both of those things require all of us. Having your heart broken open, that's a requires all of us, and giving all of ourselves to awe requires all of us. Why do we struggle with being enveloped in awe, do you think?
Do we struggle with? I mean, to me, awe is something that just happens. We can create invitation for it. We can be more attentive to it.
Yeah.
But if you see, a gorgeous moonrise,
Yeah.
you don't like go, well, let me not feel what that moonrise might feel like, or
Yeah.
or a cat rubs. I'm a cat person, a
Me
cat
too.
like comes up and wants to be friends with you,
Yeah.
and or a dewdrop on a leaf. I mean,
Yeah.
it can be really small, or it can
Yeah.
be like this magnificent sunset, or it can be a baby laughing for the first time. I mean, we're surrounded
Yeah.
by little awe and big awe,
Mm.
all the time. And I don't know that there's a gap there where we decide whether or not to
Mm.
feel awe,
I
but
think,
we can decide to be more attentive to it.
yeah.
And maybe that's what you were asking, that
I
we
think,
walk around with looking down and with our hearts closed, as opposed to that more expansive.
yeah.
Um, I make a distinction, maybe from the same place of what you read, I don't remember, but I talk about the difference between having our hearts broken and having them broken open, right? And to me, that open part is crucial,
Mm.
because to have our hearts just be broken, to inhabit brokenheartedness, is is not necessarily something that is helpful.
Mm.
It's natural, but if we build a cottage there and that's where we live, but adding the open, to me, transforms the experience. I
Mm.
may still feel the same amount of pain, but maybe the field that holds, if my heart is, maybe that's it. It's a large, go back to containers, right? It's a different container. If it's just me and a broken heart, then I'm closing in around that, right? I'm trying to shelter my broken heart. It's a constriction. Whereas if I talk about broken open, it's an expansion.
Mm.
Again, you're making me think of new ways to talk about a thing. So, and that in that expansion, not only is there more room, a larger energy to hold the sadness, the grief, the whatever the brokenness might be, but we're also receptive to the beauty and the awe in a way that shut down version of ourselves is not.
Yeah. Maybe that's
Does that
the,
speak to what you were asking?
yes. And I think maybe it speaks to despair as suffering without meaning. Like the brokenheartedness without the openness
Mm-hmm.
is that suffering without meaning. It's the openness that gives it meaning. Um,
Yeah,
so, yeah.
yeah. Well, Dr. Thurman talks about suffering as a spiritual discipline, which when I first saw that was both shocking and hallelujah, because so much of my own spiritual journey has revolved around the affliction of, chronic life-threatening illness. But Thurman defines spiritual disciplines as the practices that help us remove the barriers to our union with the divine. And so, things like meditation and prayer and music and the things that we think of, that we engage with intention, right, to open the way to our communion. But he also talks about suffering as a spiritual discipline, because it can gather all of our attention, our focus in a single direction, that all the extraneous stuff falls away, you know, and that there's an availability for that connection. But it's not automatic, right? Some people respond to suffering by shutting down, right? Staying in the broken, enclosed broken suffering part. And some respond to suffering by opening to something larger. We can make a choice. Sometimes it's a choice against our automatic response, but at any point we can, and that's the discipline part, right? We can choose to practice something different. We can choose with intention. And if we don't know how, we can say, Spirit, God, universe, ancestors, whoever it is that, that you are in alignment with when you pray, help me. I don't know how to do this. Help me make the shift from just broken to broken open. Help me make the shift from shutting down and tightening around my suffering to opening up to something larger. Show me how. Help me to do it. Breathe into my closed places and help open them. We are surrounded by so much help, but we just don't realize it most of the time.
It makes me think of the inspire, aspire, conspire that you talked about, and I just had never put it all together that way, right? That it all comes from the same Latin root meaning spirit, that,
Mm-hmm.
which I feel like there's a good connection there too. Of Liza, we need more time. There's just so many good things to talk about here.
We can do a part two if you want.
But the ancestral piece, right? Like that you talked about so beautifully in this, and like you said, there's just this. There is support there for us, right? There are those waiting to conspire with us, to join us in that breath, to do the work that we have that is ahead of us. Will you share a bit about how your understanding of ancestors has evolved or changed over the course of your growth?
Yeah. And it very much has, More and more I find that everything is about relationship, you know, relationship with other humans, relationship with nature, relationship with cosmos, with ancestors, with the coming generations, relationship with parts of ourselves. Yeah. And so, I had done over the years healing work on some of the less than ideal relationships with, you know, folks in my own life who are now in the ancestor world. But I don't remember how many years ago it was, Phil, that I felt guided to create an ancestor altar separate. A lot of people have their ancestors integrated into their primary altar, their place where they meditate and pray and so forth. And I just felt really compelled to just to have a separate spot. And it began very small with just a cloth on my dresser and a couple of photos of, folks from my bloodline who have passed away. But it's on my dresser at the foot of my bed. So I see them last thing before I go to sleep every night and first thing in the morning when I wake up. And it brought me into a daily relationship, conversational relationship. Sometimes lighting a candle and sitting with them and, asking for guidance about a thing, right? And that altar has grown. Of course, more people have passed away, so it's grown that way too. But I've also added some of my spiritual ancestors, people who were my teachers in life and who are now in that realm, friends of mine, same thing. And I've been amazed at the richness of the experience, right? Many folks have within their own cultural heritage ancestral practices. I don't have that I am aware of, something that I felt like I wanted to look up and replicate. This was just a simple, intuitive way to cultivate relationship. And the richness as those relationships have flourished, the healing that has come from that. And honestly, I think the help that there are some things that I'm like, okay, Daddy, I see you, okay, Dr. Thurman, I see you, and thank you so much, you know. And it's just part of that larger practice of feeling our relationships with everything, that we are woven into life. And the culture teaches us the dominant, modernity colonial capitalist culture teaches us that we're separate, that we're these atomized individual things, and, look out for number one, and, climb to the top of the heap and squash everybody down so that they don't take your place, right? That is not the nature of the universe that I know. And to more and more deconstruct and debunk that individualism and to come home to our belonging. I mean, belonging is such a powerful, powerful practice, quality awareness. Yeah, it shifts everything. To feel our belonging to the land, to the folk, to all of life is a very different way to live. And in these times that are so supremely difficult, I don't think I could face what's going on the planet without that sense of being held by something so much larger.
Oh man, we've gotten through like a quarter of our questions, Liza, because we just have so many. But I don't want to end our time together without ending talking about the all walks that you talked about. Will you talk to us a little bit about all walks? And if you have a spot right now that you love to take all walks in, will you tell us about it?
Well, let me contextualize it a little bit for your listeners. So there's a researcher at UC Berkeley. I hope I'm getting his name right without looking at the book. Dashiell Keltner, something close enough to that.
Dacher Keltner.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And he wrote a book, I don't know, a few handful of years ago while I was, working on, in the early stages of working on mine, about awe. And at UC Berkeley, he led research into awe and interviewed people all over the world, thousands of people all over the world, from different cultures, different faiths, different governmental structures, dictatorships, democracies, the whole spectrum, and offered them a particular definition and asked what evoked that for them, right? And came up with like the 8 top things that generate awe in human beings. And he is the one that talks about how do we experience more awe, in that there's health benefits, right? Mental health and physical health, longevity benefits to the experience of awe. So he talks about awe walks, going for a walk with the intention and awareness to sniff out experiences of awe, And, of course, being attentive to ableism, because that's a big part of my own life. It could be an awe sit. You could pick a spot, sit down. You don't have to be walking. But it is just looking around wherever you are. Like we were talking about earlier, Jenny. It's like making ourselves available. And Dr. Thurman talks about your sniffer, right? Sniffing. I'm like sniffing out. We just finally had rain after no rain for a month here in Oakland. The fragrance of the earth, even of the pavement, when it just starts to rain, that can be an awe moment for me, right? Seeing the first leaves coming out on the trees after winter, the first buds, that's an awe moment, And so those are the little mundane awe, if you will. And then there's the capital AWE, which might be a gorgeous sunset or a piece of music that makes us cry, or the number one thing that evoked awe, they found in their research, was what he called moral courage. So witnessing people responding with love and bravery to adversity. you know. And we see evidence of that, whether it's as personal as witnessing somebody learn to walk again after a stroke, or whether it's thousands of people in the streets who are standing with love to resist the invasion of ICE. You know, those are things that if we let ourselves feel them, evoke awe. You know, the singing resistance movement in Minneapolis, when I see thousands of people singing to each other and to the neighborhood, that made me cry. That's an awe moment. I kind of got off the walk thing, but the walk is one venue of many. But their research said if you take just one all walk a week for like 8 weeks, it can change your blood pressure, your blood chemistry, your level of cognitive decline, or lack of cognitive decline. I mean, it's astounding medicine. And that is a practice that we can engage with intention every day.
Okay, so I have to ask you, when I open the book, there's a beautiful spiral on the cover. When you think of a spiral, what does it invoke in you?
Oh, I love that, Phil. To me, a spiral is the evolutionary unfolding of life. I've never been asked that. I've never said it before, but that's what comes up for me first. I'll stick with that.
It's a beautiful answer. I love it. Yeah, it's great.
It's also a shape that is everywhere in nature.
Mm-hmm.
From the galaxies, right, to our ear.
That's what I was just thinking.
Our
Yeah.
inner ear. And so again, that's something to be in awe about. How is it that this shape can be so vast and so intimate? Clearly it's an important pattern.
Yeah, very DNA, right? A double helix, right? That, yeah, there's a lot wrapped up in that. Oh, that's the pun for the day. There we go. Dad jokes are here. Liza, again, I think we could talk all day long, but for the sake of our listeners, we'll at least pause here and see if maybe we can have you back here before too long. But would love to know where our listeners can find your work. We've mentioned your book multiple times, Soul Medicine for a Fractured World, but where else can they find the incredible things you're doing in the world?
Oh, thank you for that. Yeah, my website is probably Mission Control
Okay.
to access everything else. My website is just my name, but because my name can be hard to remember and spell, I also linked it to soulmedicinebook.com. So
Nice.
super easy for folks to remember and to find. And there's an invitation there to subscribe to my Substack, which is also my email list. My social media stuff is linked there, and I welcome folks to connect on Facebook and Insta. And I'm most active on those two, even though I have accounts on some of the others. But yeah, I would love to stay connected with you and your listeners, and would be delighted to come back again.
Ooh, awesome. Liza also has a really lovely Substack, which I have been enjoying. This is a prayer excerpted from Soul Medicine for a Fractured World. It's called A Guide to the, and my Southern accent is not going to do this justice, but the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. Okay. Hear these words.
Bodhisattva, Jenny. We need to get that one right, because it is it's from the Buddhist tradition.
Okay.
And Bodhisattva.
Bodhisattva.
And this is from I love what you're about to read, and it's written by an 8th century Buddhist monk named Shantideva. And this is just one interpretation. It's actually not even a literal translation, but it's a lovely version of it. Yeah.
All right, friends. So hear these words and carry them in your heart as you go about your day. May I become at all times, both now and forever, a protector of those without protection, a guide for those who have lost their way, a ship for those with oceans to cross, a bridge for those with rivers to cross, a sanctuary for those in danger, a lamp for those without light, a place of refuge for those who lack shelter, and a servant to all in need. For as long as space endures, and for as long as living beings remain, until then may I too abide to dispel the misery of the world. Amen.
Amen.
Liza, thank you. You have been medicine to my soul. And so just such deep gratitude to you. And I believe that will be the case for our listeners too. But if, again, I can't emphasize it enough, go pick up Liza's book and check her out online. She truly is a gift. So we are grateful. Thank you.
Thank you both so much.